A species lost for 180 years, recovered through genetic detective work and a captive breeding programme. And, in one of the stranger twists in conservation history, made possible by the actions of the whalers who caused the extinction in the first place. Hello, and welcome to the Ocean News Podcast, an audio series in which we take a deeper dive into the most important stories and biggest headlines from the Oceanographic newsroom. I'm Eva Cahill, the editorial assistant here at Oceanographic, and today's episode takes us to a story almost 200 years in the making. This month, for the first time in 180 years, giant tortoises are once again roaming the landscapes of Floreana Island in the Galapagos, as 158 juvenile tortoises were released back into their ancestral habitat. Their return has implications that stretch far beyond the ancestral land they are reconnecting with underfoot, as conservationists say the species will strengthen the island's land-sea ecosystems and importantly pave the way for the return of more extinct animals on the islands. But to understand why this matters, and why it took quite so long to get there, you have to go back almost 2 centuries. When Charles Darwin set foot on Floreana in 1835, the island's tortoise population was already on the brink. For decades, Floreana had been a popular port of call for whalers in search of food, and they had removed thousands of the animals. One day, while on the island, Darwin and HMS Beagle Cap Robert Fitzroy were escorted by the Galapagos' vice-governor to the small highland village of Aseo de Paz. There they were confronted with the sheer scale of tortoise decimation, as tortoise shells lay scattered across the ground. So shocked was Captain Fitzroy that he wrote in his journal, "The quantity of tortoise shells lying about the ground shows what havoc has been made among these helpless animals." Darwin noted in his journal that the vice-governor thinks there is yet left sufficient for 20 years. Mr. Lawson, it transpired, was being a little optimistic. By 1850, the Floreana giant tortoise was gone. Or so everyone thought. Because here is where the story takes a remarkable turn, and it involves the very whalers responsible for the extinction in the first place. Those same ships, moving between islands, had occasionally unloaded tortoises onto a nearby island called Isabella, sometimes to stash them for later, sometimes, according to geneticist Gisela Cocconi and her colleagues, tossed overboard in nearshore waters simply to lighten the cargo during flight or battle. And on Isabella, on the slopes of Wolf Volcano, something had been going on unnoticed for over a century. Mixed in among the typical dome-shell tortoises of the island were animals with saddleback shells, a shape associated with tortoises from Floreana. In 2008, Caccione's team took DNA samples from 86 of these animals and found they carried the same genetic signatures as the museum specimens recovered from Floreana more than 150 years earlier. In some, the match was strong enough to suggest that effectively purebred Floreana tortoises might still be alive. The lineage hadn't disappeared, it had just been on a different island. In 2015, rangers and scientists returned to Wolf Volcano, identified 23 individuals with particularly strong Floreana ancestry and transported them to a captive breeding centre on Santa Cruz. The 158 tortoises released this month are the result of that programme, raised to be genetically as close as possible to the original Floreana population. Their return is part of a much larger undertaking. The reintroduction is part of the Island Ocean Connection Challenge, an ambitious campaign to restore 40 globally significant islands from reef to ridge by 2030. Following the tortoises, conservationists plan to reintroduce a further 12 species to Floreana: the Floreana racer snake, the vermilion flycatcher, the Galapagos rail, the Galapagos hawk, the lava gull, the Floreana mockingbird, and 5 species of Darwin's finches. As keystone species, the tortoises are expected to begin reshaping the island's habitats immediately, dispersing seeds, creating wallows, and influencing how vegetation grows and regenerates. Rakan Zahawi, executive director of the Charles Darwin Foundation, described them as a critical part of the ecological system, helping rebuild the processes that many other species depend on. And part of this is rebuilding the land-sea connection. Healthy tortoises are expected to improve nesting and feeding conditions for seabirds, particularly for species like the lava gull, which are slated for reintroduction. Those seabirds in turn contribute nutrients that flow into the surrounding marine ecosystems, supporting coral reefs and fisheries. It is, as conservationists have said, a hugely significant milestone. A species lost for 180 years, recovered through genetic detective work and a captive breeding programme. And, in one of the stranger twists in conservation history, made possible by the actions of the whalers who caused the extinction in the first place. With the introduction of the 11 other extinct species on the horizon, it will be an interesting conservation story to keep an eye on. If you would like to learn more about this story or other stories related to conservation, subscribe to the Ocean News podcast or head to the Oceanographic newsroom. This has been the Ocean News podcast. I've been Eva Cahill. Thank you for listening.